This year we've been very excited to celebrate the 75th anniversary of our state association, the Home Builders Association of Michigan. It's been around since 1949. The assets of a state home builders association are really about its staff and the knowledge and experience that they bring to the table to provide services to our members, to advocate on behalf of our members. When I think about all the experience of our team and I look at other associations across the country, HBAs that have maybe not had as much success as our state association, it really comes down to whether or not they were able to keep their strongest people on staff, because that's how value gets delivered to members from a state association. And we've been very fortunate and blessed as a state association over the last 75 years. So as you listen to the leaders of our organization over the past couple of decades, let it serve as a reminder that we are indeed stronger together.
In 1995, the state adopted the Council of American Building Officials Model Energy Code. It was a disaster for builders. Mike Rogers, who was serving legislator out of Livingston County at that time, Mike put in a bill to repeal the Model Energy Code and require Michigan to write its own specific energy code. The bill also required that any new energy code be cost effective. Following that, we had a process for about a year in which our work group at the Home Builders, and this is what I mean when I talk about member involvement, we met face to face once every 10 days for almost a year to write what was then the Michigan Uniform Energy Code. It was approved and promulgated by the state, and it really set the wave for future energy codes here in Michigan. You had to have the 7-year payback. If it didn't pay back in 7 years, you couldn't do it. People had to still be able to get the house. A lot of good changes. And the idea was keep housing affordable and attainable. And that's what the energy code was about.
Another big item was the single state building code. When we started that process, there was up to 1,850 different building codes in the state of Michigan, because each unit of government could make changes to the building code and not publish them. So when the single state construction code came out, it was a combination of BOCA, CABO, uniform, and brought it all under one house. Also, all changes had to be made at the state level and published 90 days before the code took effect so builders could get ready for it.
One of the things that we wanted to do by having one single book for residential building is to make it easier for builders to build. If you didn't have to obey 1,800 different rules, but just one book, one rule, it really smooths the process out for our members.
When I say we worked on this, I mean it was all the members, it was the executive committee, it was the senior officers, it was all the people who worked hard in the committees to come up with these changes to state law. It led to finally my induction into the Constructor Hall of Fame up at Ferris State University last year, which was kind of a capstone to my building career. And I thank all of the people in the association that made that possible for me to be nominated.
It took us 10 years to get architect seal reform in. The problem that we had is that the law of the architect's law requires, if you're doing a home over 3,500 square foot, you have to have an architect seal on it. It's costly, it's unnecessary, and it really became a problem when basements were being included. We negotiated with the architects. We finally got non-habitable space, including basements, removed from the calculation of the 3,500 square foot, saving thousands of dollars.
We started working on the Michigan Construction Hall of Fame with all the great builders and people in the construction industry here in Michigan. We needed to have some recognition of those great people that build that American dream. And several of our past presidents have been inducted into the Hall of Fame, and what a great honor that is for them and for all those inductees.
I have some funny stories about it. A realtor brought a client to one of the houses I had just finished, and he walked up the stairs. I was with my plumber, and he shook my plumber's hand and said, "Hi, Mr. Feelick, how are you doing? This is my client." But I've never taken any of that seriously. I've never had an issue trying to compete with men or be better with men. And I think that's one thing I've learned over all these years, is that I think builders in general have kind of a bad rap and a bad reputation. I have to tell you honestly, these are the best guys in the world to work with, and women. You can see how it works when people work together, and the support that you get from joining the association. And I'm not talking just about the benefits that you get, but the actual support you get is, I think, critical to making our association what it is today. It's an honor to have been the first woman president. I'm just encouraging anyone who's thinking of going into the field, men, women, whoever you are, I encourage you to get involved with the state association and with your local association.
The Consumer Protection Act exempts builders from its rules and regulations, and that's written right into the law. We spent about 5 years in court, going all the way up to the Supreme Court, to make sure that everyone understood that a builder or a remodeler, anyone who's licensed in the state of Michigan, you're exempt from the Consumer Protection Act. That has worked very well. Now that's under threat again. It's very important to a builder or a remodeler that they not face the double jeopardy of both being gone after by the state under their license and being gone after under the Consumer Protection Act. We worked for about 8 months on an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to say that you can't take a home or a person's property for economic development reasons. And if you want to take it for blight, you can't use blight as an excuse to then turn the property over. We were successful in that. It overwhelmingly passed when it was put to a vote of the people. That is a big step forward. Michigan was one of the first states to provide that sort of protection to owners of property.
As a new CEO at the time, and coming from an economic development background, our association's stand on property rights really stood out for me because our economy was nosediving at the time. And at that time, your state association invested thousands of dollars to support a ballot initiative to prohibit eminent domain to be used for economic development. That showed to me that there was really a long-term view of our state and of our industry, that its leaders would be so forward-thinking as to look past the short-term pain that our state was experiencing at the time. Really drove home that fact that I was working for a group that had a ton of integrity and that I wanted to work for and advocate for.
One of the unique problems that we ran into with the licensing law is that there are really two licenses for builders and remodelers. You have a corporate license and you have your own personal license. We got together with the Granholm administration, and in a bipartisan fashion, we changed the law so that you have to have corporate license which is tied to your personal license. So you can't just keep churning through corporations. You do something bad, you're going to lose both of the licenses. Part of that we pushed too was continuing education. Bill originally wanted 60 hours of continuing education for pre-licensure, so you had to take that, and that stayed. But there was also a requirement for 20 hours of continuing competency. A lot of our older members have said, I already know how to do this, why do I have to do this? And so we pared that back down to 3. And that licensing law has worked very well for everybody.
Bob was president of the local association in 1994, president of the state association in 1999, and he was president of NHB in 2010. Fortunately or unfortunately, he was on the senior ladder every time there was something going on that was against housing. His theme when he ran the second time was Bob Works, and it caught on everywhere. Everybody wanted a Bob Works pin. That was the theme, and we carried it through, and he was successful. And of course, right after that is when everything went downward. And so for the rest of his term, it was important to be fiscally responsible. So although we had the option of flying into Reagan Airport for DC meetings, we flew into Baltimore and took the train because it was cheaper. And Bob was determined that he was not going to use NAHB's money if he didn't have to. And that went through his whole year in 2010, through him and through the people that preceded him at the state association and those that followed. I think he set the pace, he set that bar very high of how important it was to give back to the association and to the industry that had been so beneficial to us over the years and our business.
14 and a half years ago, we sued the city of Troy because they were violating the Single State Construction Act. When the Single State Construction Act was passed and home builders were the primary force behind the writing and the passage of this law, we changed the way that building fees could be used. In the past, local units of government would take money from the building fee and use it for other purposes. And so we changed it to say that you can only use it to run your department, your building department, and it must be reasonably related to the cost of running the department. Troy signed a contract with a private firm to operate their building department. This private firm was kicking back 25% of the building fees to the city of Troy. The city of Troy was then using it to run other areas of government. Twice the Supreme Court has unanimously agreed with the builders that this can't be done. So just about a month ago, we were in court again before the Court of Appeals. The court found that this is not only illegal, but it was a violation of the Headley Amendment. We've been fighting this sort of thing for a while. Building fees should not be used to fund other parts of government.
I saw what regulation was doing to not just our industry, but a lot of industries. So I decided I should go on and see if I can make a difference, and I ended up running for the Michigan House of Representatives, and in 2010 I won that position. Back in 1997, I was on the executive committee. We had a futurist come in and talk, and he said something that I've never forgotten. He said there are those that make it happen, there are those that let it happen, and he said there are those that say what happened, and you have to decide where you're going to fall in that. So that's been one of my guides along the way.
So I became an officer just prior to the Great Recession. And in my very first few meetings as an officer, I learned the impact that the decrease in membership was having. It wasn't very long into that we realized that we were going to have a deep financial crisis because we were losing so many members because they were leaving the business. A group of officers got together and we started doing the reductions of staff and cutting everything we can. And eventually we had to look at our assets, and one of our assets was our building. And a member, Clyde, another senior officer, and myself, we led this charge, and we found a way to sell our building, buy a new one, and actually end up with some money in the bank at the end of it and reduce our expenses so that we could try to be as cognizant as we could of how good of a steward we were with the membership money.
Coming off of 2008, 9, and 10, as builders, our industry was decimated. We had lost a number of members of our association, and we were trying to build momentum, right? And so we talked about branding as a strategy. How could we grow our association? How could we grow the community, homeowners knowing who we are and what we represented? So we talked about a common logo. It was not easy to get 23 or 24 associations on board. Everybody had their brand, but we put together a great task force, and we just got everybody aboard slowly. And I love when I go to the Parade of Homes in the Lakeshore, and I go to the Parade of Homes down at West Michigan HBA, and I see this common logo, because it means we built a common brand everywhere, and homeowners recognize that brand. People come to us and say they want to use a builder who's a member of the Home Builders Association. So seeing this common logo across the state makes us a better organization. Without a strong association, you cannot have a strong dynamic dynamic building industry. So having a common logo, having a common purpose makes our association better, makes our community better, makes our industry better. And so I love what the HBA does for my business, I love what the HBA does for my community, and I love what the HBA does for my state.
Additionally, it was realized that a lot of our non-dues revenues was tied to the number of members that we had. And as our membership shrank, so too was our non-dues revenue. We looked around and realized that the role that the state association played was critical and that no one else was filling that. So the duties and responsibilities the state has was so critical that we had to find a way to fund those. So we started building a coalition of members, and we learned that we had to go and talk and find out what was important and get ourselves down to our core functions and then figure out how to fund it. So I was one of the people that led a charge to redo our dues, and I don't know if you'd say I championed that, but I certainly went around the state, did a great listening tour, and was willing to ask people what we could pay and how we could pay it to raise our dues to support our core functions of the state. A side effect of that was our other members learned from us that we cared about the core functions, and they told us what was important. By the time we had passed our dues increase, people knew that they were getting value for their dollar and that it was worthwhile having paid this additional funds. When I came to Home Builders as a young man, I was in my early 20s. I didn't know a whole lot, but I knew I wanted to hang around intelligent people and learn from them. And having been a part of this now for nearly 30 years, I've learned that all the work that I've done is standing on the shoulders of other leaders that have come before me as the foundation. So when I'm having success, I'm aware that the people that came before me laid the groundwork for that.
One of the other changes that we made, as we got into the code promulgation process, we were required to adopt a new code every 3 years. Given the cost of the code book and given the fact that most of the changes that went from one edition every 3 years to the next edition every 3 years were not substantive changes, we went to the legislature and got the legislature to pass what we call the Flex Code Act. It applies only to residential, but it allows the state to skip an edition of the code. So for example, we adopted the 2015 code, we skipped the 18, but if there was anything in the 18 code that benefited builders, they were allowed to use it out of the 18 code even if it wasn't adopted.
Over the years, we've had several victories that directly impact the residential construction industry. I would say that our biggest one was having inventory tax removed from spec homes. Decades were spent on that legislation, and it was with bipartisan sponsors of Representative Margaret O'Brien at the time and Representative Marilyn Lane that a Republican and a Democrat were able to come together and get that piece of legislation passed and signed into law for us.
We have been involved in 3 different rewrites of the Wetlands Protection Act, each one improving the situation for builders and remodelers and property owners, because that's a key thing. The next one that came up was the Critical Dunes Act. You could not build in areas that the state had drawn a line on a map and said, these are critical dunes and we're not going to let you build there. So we passed a law that loosened the restrictions on building while keeping the environmental protections there.
Other victories that we've been able to achieve in this building deal with Skill to Build Michigan Foundation. Skill to Build Michigan Foundation works to cultivate, educate, and recruit either students, veterans, or returning citizens into the residential construction industry. We've partnered with the legislature for March's Reading Month, so we had legislators go out and read Billy the Build-A-Bear Builds a House. But we were also successful in obtaining a $2 million grant in their fiscal year 23 budget to get into the hands of 570,000 8th through 12th graders the book Build Your Future, a complete guide to your career and skilled trades. Just recently we were able to secure an additional grant funding to reach 8th graders next school year, and we are also a recognized credential through the Michigan Department of Education Career Technical Education Division, where I'm pleased to announce that we have credentialed 173 students in this last school year with the Skill to Build Michigan credential. Not only do we partner with students We partner with veterans and we partner with returning citizens.
The original affiliation fee idea came from Connie Valere, a legendary CEO of the HBA of Midland. The affiliation fee agreement transitioned from a per member remittance of dues to the state association to a flat fee. The affiliation fee model was based on the number of members at each local association in the summer of July of 2015, and then it was calculated so that there would be a flat, consistent rate based on the size of the association moving forward.
The thing that stands out for me in terms of how we fund the state association is that our local EOs got engaged in the process to come up with the plan to do it, and also that a handful of states have actually adopted our model since we adopted it several years ago.
Leading up to our strategic planning session in August of 2016, I was asked by someone what my primary focus would be when I stepped into the president's role starting that fall. Without a doubt, the biggest challenge facing our industry at the time, and as well as now, was the growing crisis of housing affordability. Since the HBA was the primary voice of housing in Michigan, it was obvious that we had to do something. That meeting is where I laid out this challenge to my fellow HBA leaders and staff. Our team hit the ground running with a game plan. Bob and the staff, along with the locals, scheduled a series of fact-finding meetings across the state that winter. The staff quickly pulled together a draft report. The three main principles that must be addressed that came out of this report. 1. Local government policies and fees that negatively impact housing investment had to be spotlighted. 2. State authority to enforce code and land development laws compliance must be clear, and communities have to be educated on their important role and responsibility to make sure their fees are reasonable and that their permit process is not only user-friendly but proactive for housing. And 3, efforts to train and attract individuals to the skilled trades must be dramatically increased and sustained in the long term. Now, the release of this report galvanized our team around the state, and we quickly held multiple press conferences at job sites in several communities. A copy was given to the governor, who directed MSHDA to start their own initiatives to address these growing problems. So here we are 7 years later, and everyone knows now that this is a national crisis. And yet we've had some success. A Michigan Housing Coalition was formed in our legislature, and for the first time, the state now has a housing plan, and a few positive laws have already been passed. MSHDA has unveiled their single-family home program, among other things. Many communities have begun good, serious work on their policies, and NEHB followed suit a couple of years after our report with their own report and recommendations. So much work obviously needs to be done, and really we are at the beginning of a long process. I'm very proud of our HBA and our leadership and our staff and local members that set these priorities in motion and are keeping up the pressure to ensure the results that the health and economic prosperity of our people, communities, and businesses depend upon. Looking back on this, I guess I was pretty fired up at the time we initiated this whole project. And I guess my passion for this must have had some effect on folks in the association. My peers nominated me for inclusion in the Michigan Construction Industry Hall of Fame in 2022 for our work on this vital issue facing our country.
After the housing study came out in 2017, there was an obvious shortage for workers, and I think that's a great thing for me to focus on was workforce development. So that kickstarted my involvement at my local level, being part of some building trades committees, trying to help do advisory committees, and just stimulate the next generation to join. Along with getting workforce development, one of my big passions is young professionals. I have a handful of years left in it, so I've been trying to work hard at trying to build the state and local level. I was also played a big role in the NAHB's proposal to allow discounted membership for young professionals to try to boost the growth. The last report that we had in DC earlier this year, they were at 355 new members between the 12 locals that signed up. So I think it's a pretty big success so far. We might not have gotten those 355 people. So I'm hoping that they expand on that and keep it growing. And I'm proud to say that it came as an initiative out of Michigan.
Other victories, even as recently as this session, have included having residential activity included in tax increment financing to be recaptured. And others, last session, we had bipartisan support on legislation that also directly impacts workforce housing, from expanding neighborhood enterprise zones to expanding payment in lieu of taxes. We were able to have bipartisan support, bipartisan legislature, pass legislation that allows workforce housing to be developed across the state of Michigan, yet keep the fabric of communities in place. That legislation came out of the creation of the Housing Michigan Coalition, which has a very diverse executive committee that was very intentional to show the legislature that housing is an ecosystem and it crosses all sectors. So when we go and testify in support of legislation, we go up as a group because we want legislators to see that housing isn't just a builder issue. We will continue to come to you from this Capitol building and work on your behalf as we lobby Republicans and Democrats to work to solve the housing crisis situation in the state of Michigan. The only way that we can be successful with our legislative policy agenda across the street at the Capitol is if we can be successful in Election Day by endorsing and financially supporting those candidates and legislators that support you and your right to do business as a residential contractor, remodeler, or in any part of the residential home building industry.
We just heard some fantastic history of our organization. That is just a kernel of the accomplishments we've been able to achieve over the last 75 years. What it is a testament to how strong we are when we're in this together. As we look ahead, there's a whole new generation coming forward. We can't lose sight of the importance of this group, and we need to make a commitment to asking prospective members to join our association so that we can continue to thrive for the next 75 years.